Member for Warringah.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, it's hard not to feel quite dejected today, to have to stand here and debate this legislation after listening to the most amazing speeches at the National Press Club by Brittany Higgins and Grace Tame, where they raised attention and called for action on really serious issues: domestic violence, protecting women and children, protecting girls and boys from sexual abuse, children from sexual abuse, issues that really need urgent attention and debate in this place. But instead, we're here to debate a highly divisive bill. And I'm very sad to say to the people of Warringah, the ultimate outcome is a political outcome. This is not an outcome that is in the best interest of Australia, I would say, of people of faith and of, in particular, vulnerable groups. This is a legislation to score political points. And ultimately, I think it will be a role by the opposition to safeguard political points. But it will not be, ultimately, an outcome that is in the best interest of Australians and vulnerable Australians. And it certainly won't be up to the lofty standards of so many words that have been said in this place. And I should say at the upfront, I absolutely respect people of faith. I have members in my family that I know it is the cornerstone of their lives. But you simply can't have that your faith overrides other protections. One person's right does not override the other person's right to safety. I rise to speak this package of legislation. It's collectively come to be known as the Religious Discrimination Bill 2021, and for those that maybe are not following closely, it includes associated consequential amendment bills and the Human Rights Legislation Amendment Freedom of Religion Bill 2021. So at its core, it's not up for debate. The fact that we should have protection against discrimination on the basis of religious grounds is sound. There's no debate that that is a sensible and something that should exist. This bill creates the new Office of Religious Discrimination Commissioner in the Australian Human Rights Commission. And it would have been so good if this bill could have stopped there. But unfortunately, it goes on to sanction discrimination on the basis of religions. It provides religious institutions, and there's a very broad definition of religious institutions. This is not limited to simply the church or a faith-based institution. It's a very broad definition. To discriminate against others with their views or identity where others' views or identity do not align with their religious beliefs and practices. And I have had many people come and talk to me about, the right to the ethos of religious teachings and the right to convey that. But there's always a stumbling block of why then should that right give a right to discriminate against others and put others at risk and more vulnerable people at risk. There's no issue about protection from discrimination. All Australians should have protection against discrimination. So, of course, it would be wrong for a retailer to refuse to serve someone based on their religious beliefs or practices, or for a landlord to refuse to rent a property to a family due to their religion. But the problem is this bill is not about that. It goes so far beyond that. It permits institutions to discriminate against others, especially where there is a conflict with other anti-discrimination legislations. And we have to remember, to get to those anti-discrimination legislations, there has been a battle. They are hard fought for and won small gains when it comes to the Sex Discrimination Act, the Racial Discrimination Act, the Disability Discrimination Act. And what this bill does is it will specifically override state and territory discrimination legislation, and that is wrong. We should be seeking to increase protections, not decrease protections. I acknowledge this version of the bill has been watered down since it was first released for consultation in 2019. We would all know the removal of the Folau clause, which prohibited someone from being fired for expressing a statement of belief. And that has been removed from the current legislation. So we can still employers are able to set the standard of conduct expected of employees in and outside their workplace. It also removes the provisions which allowed for health professionals to refuse treatment on the basis of religious belief. I mean, I thought it was just gobsmacking that it was in there in the first place, but that goes to show just how far the intent behind this legislation was prepared to go. But this legislation goes so far beyond being a shield in relation to the right to pursue and express your religious faith. Because what it is, it's weaponising. It's a sword. It is legalising the right to discriminate. And ultimately, it risks the persecution of so many that are more vulnerable. When this bill, if it does come into force, as the most recently passed discrimination law, it will be deemed as taking precedence over other discrimination acts where they come into conflict. It will and I have no doubt this override is deliberate, and it's codified in the views of many of my for many of my constituents. It elevates the right to discriminate based on religious belief or faith, which is ultimately a choice, above the inherent or physical attributes protected by other discrimination legislation, such as disability, sex and race, which are not a choice. I have a variety of concerns with the current draft of the bill, as did so many others and so many in our community. The two committees that have considered it, so many have said there are grave issues with this bill. A key part is Part 2 of the bill, Section 7, the broad definition of a religious body, which includes, and I've had to explain this to many people that have come to talk to me about this, telling me why this bill was, because they were people of faith, that this was so important. And then they're surprised when they hear just how far the reach is. Because this bill, Section 7, includes many services and needs-based institutions, such as schools, hospitals, aged care facilities, disability care facilities, homelessness services, food banks, and many others. Sections 9 to 11, which provide for the ability to hire and fire people in accordance with a publicly stated policy grounded in religious belief. So this means that a homelessness organisation, a food bank organisation, because it is supported by a faith, would have the right to fire the gardener, the cleaners, because if they were of a different faith, or if they didn't, if they pursued, if they were in same-sex relationships or had anything that went against the ethos of the religious organisation. Section 12, which affords the right to make a statement of belief, which is very controversial, which, as long as it is in accordance with your religious beliefs, can be offensive and demeaning to the person receiving or subject to the statement. So basically, it's a free pass to be offensive, to be hurtful, to be demeaning to other people. I have concerns with these sections because their impact on a variety of groups in society, and we know that these are groups that already suffer from types of discrimination, and this bill will legalise that right to persecute them and gives individuals and institutions a sword to continue and amplify that discrimination. Women, LGBTQI, disability, and even some religious groups such as the Hindu Council have spoken out about the impact that this bill will have on their lives. In Warringah, we have an increasingly diverse community. Each year, I host a Youth Ambassadors Dialogue with all the school captains of the schools in my area, and they're invited to come and meet regularly and discuss with me and other school captains the concerns. And each year, especially last year, gender and sexual identity for young people is a top issue. This is something that weighs on their mind, and we know it interrelates with mental health issues, and we know we are facing an epidemic of mental health issues. We should be very, very wary of doing anything that could possibly exacerbate what is already a very dire situation. But instead of focusing on that, we are focusing on a way to make it more divisive, more difficult for some of those young people. Many of the students have expressed to me concerns around lack of proper education, lack of acceptance, around sexual identity and gender, especially in faith-based schools and institutions. Of the 13 schools that take part in the Warringah Youth Ambassadors program, 6 are faith-based. Across Australia, 30% of schools are faith-based or religiously affiliated, and 94% of independent schools are faith-based or religiously affiliated. Sex discrimination is already an issue in the school environment. We know LGBTQI students regularly hear or witness discriminatory practices. 90% of students report hearing homophobic comments at school. 30% of LGBTQ students say they have experienced or witnessed physical harassment. And this bill doesn't improve that situation. In fact, it may well make it much worse, codifying a protection for people to make those comments under the guise of a statement of belief. We've heard many moving stories in this place in the last 2 days, personal reflections, and I'd like to thank and acknowledge the member for Whitlam's contribution and express my condolences. And the member for Bass, very brave speech, expressed so well everything that I think is wrong with this legislation. Some of my constituents have contacted me with similar fears for their children. One constituent told me the story of her child who went through 3 schools before they found one where they felt comfortable and supported. She wrote to me, "Adolescent kids don't often tell their parents everything, or at least not right away. It took a few days for my non-binary child to reveal what their religious instructor shared in class. Whilst Christians are an accepting lot, God does not approve of homosexuality." This wasn't the first time they experienced homophobia. At 11 years old, they lost their best friend when his Christian parents heard a rumour my child might be gay. I thank that parent for sharing their story with me to shine a light on the devastating ripple effects that we are discussing in this place. The issue of sexual identity and gender identity in Australia is one that needs to be more deeply understood and education systems enhanced to increase understanding. We should not be codifying the right for 30% of schools to discriminate against a growing proportion of our children. Like the LGBTQ community, disability groups are rightly concerned about the statement of belief in the bill. People with disability are often subjected to unwelcome and uninvited statements of religious belief that demean disability as a result of sin, possession or karma. It's disgusting, those kind of comments. They've been told things like their disability is a punishment from God for their parents' sins and they can be healed by prayer, or they deserve to suffer for their disability for what they have done in a previous life. These are quotes that have been put to me. It's revolting to think that people express that. It's offensive. In the words of the 2022 Australian of the Year, people with disability fight every day to prove they can do whatever they want to do. They don't need your thoughts and prayers, they just need you to treat them with respect, and it's something this bill does not do. There has been much debate about the impact of this bill on women. Women who have children out of wedlock, haven't had an abortion, have had IVF, and those who live in de facto relationships feel and are worried they will be discriminated against in employment opportunities. And this is important because women overwhelmingly work in employment in service-based institutions that are very often religiously affiliated. Women have fought hard for equal rights for years now, yet really haven't yet achieved it in practice. But for now, these rights to even be legally superseded by religious belief is just not okay. It's a step backwards and it's unacceptable. I've listened to many in this place talk about how much those rights mean, yet I have little hope that when the time comes to vote, few members will actually stand up for their beliefs. Most will follow the politically convenient line and vote for this legislation. They will use the excuses of upcoming elections and possible wedges, and on this side of the House they will fail to ultimately stand up for the beliefs that they prosaically describe to their electorates. We have to and should be able to do so much better. I think there is a duty and a responsibility in this place to actually make for a better future, not one that is more destructive. And so I oppose this legislation.
I thank